All right, let's dive into something really fascinating today. We're going deep into Chapter 10, Integrating Indigenous Knowledge and Scientific Research.
Oh, this is a good one.
It is right. We're specifically focusing on how these two perspectives, ancient wisdom and modern science, can come together to protect our forests.
It's such a critical topic, especially now. For generations, indigenous communities have been the stewards of their environments, developing a deep, deep understanding of their local ecosystems.
And that's what we often refer to as traditional ecological knowledge, or tech, right?
Exactly. And tech is, it's not just a static collection of facts. It's a living, breathing way of life.
It's like inheriting not just a textbook about the forest, but generations of lived experiences, practices, stories even.
Absolutely, you got it. It's all about stories, rituals, cultural practices woven together with this holistic view of nature, recognizing that interconnectedness of everything in the forest.
Okay, so then how does that translate into how forests are managed? How does that differ from maybe some of the conventional methods that, we're used to thinking about?
That's a great question. Let's look at the Penan people of Borneo.
Okay.
They practice this really interesting method of selective harvesting of sago palms.
Okay.
Taking only the mature palms and leaving the younger ones to grow, you see.
So that ensures that there's always going to be more, right?
Exactly. A sustainable food source, and the forest can regenerate naturally.
It's like, I don't know, like being a forest gardener.
Yes.
Carefully tending to it.
I love that analogy.
And, another example that comes to mind is that Maya Milpa system.
Oh, fascinating system.
They integrate trees and crops and animals all together.
Yeah, the Milpa system is a prime example of agroforestry, mimicking the structure of a natural forest. And what they end up with is this amazingly resilient and diverse agricultural system, each component supporting the others,
So they're working with nature, basically.
Totally. Enhancing the overall productivity and sustainability of the system.
And that's something that we could definitely learn from.
For sure.
But it's not just about the practical techniques, right? I mean, many indigenous communities also have really powerful cultural and spiritual beliefs that also play a key role in how they approach conservation.
Oh, absolutely. Let's take the sacred groves in India, for instance. These are forest patches, and they're protected by really, really strong cultural taboos and traditions. They basically act as biodiversity hotspots.
Wow.
And seed banks. It's like having these culturally designated reserves, safeguarding the forest's natural heritage.
That's incredible. It's like built-in protection.
It really is. And then you have amazing groups like the Haudenosaunee.
Oh, the Iroquois Confederacy?
Yes. They consider the impact of their decisions on the next 7 generations.
7 generations.
That's some serious long-term planning, right?
That really puts things into perspective, that's for sure.
It does. Their 7-generation sustainability principle is an incredible example of how deeply ingrained cultural values can actually promote this long-term ecological thinking.
Yeah, challenging, I think, our very short-sighted approach.
It really does.
To resource management a lot of times.
Yeah.
It's fascinating to see these examples of tech in action. And I think reading through these case studies really brought it to life for me. One that I was particularly fascinated by is the Aboriginal fire management techniques in Australia.
Oh, yes. Their controlled burns are a perfect example of how traditional knowledge can be applied so effectively to manage entire ecosystems.
So they're using fire.
They are.
Which we usually think of as being destructive.
Yeah.
It's a tool.
As a tool. They use low-intensity fires to actually prevent the buildup of fuel that leads to those massive destructive wildfires that we hear about.
So they're preventing even bigger damage.
Exactly. They understand that fire is a natural part of that ecosystem. They've learned how to harness it.
Working with it.
Working with it, not against it. Yeah. That's the key.
Yeah. And it's not just about fire. The Hunikun people of the Amazon, they have this really incredible knowledge of medicinal plants.
Oh, they do.
So they're not just protecting trees, they're protecting a living pharmacy.
They are, you're right. It emphasizes that crucial link between biodiversity and human health.
Yeah, there's so much we don't know.
Absolutely.
That we could learn from these communities.
There really is.
Another mind-blowing example is the Kazi people of Meghalaya in India. They have these living root bridges.
Oh, how cool are those?
Grown over generations. Can you imagine? Not built, grown.
It just blows my mind. It speaks to their incredible ingenuity and really deep understanding of how to work with nature,
It's amazing, truly amazing. And then you have the Ojibwe communities in the Great Lakes region,
Yes.
who has maintained their wild rice harvesting traditions while sustainably managing the wetland ecosystems.
They understand that the health of that wild rice, which is a cultural staple for them, is completely tied to the health of that whole wetland ecosystem.
It's all connected.
It is.
So much to learn from indigenous communities, clearly,
We have so much to learn.
about how they manage forests. But how do we actually bridge the gap between that traditional knowledge and maybe our more modern scientific approaches? That feels really key, right?
It's essential. Collaboration is what we need here.
Okay.
Combining those detailed observations and insights from tech with the analytical tools of science.
We can get the best of both worlds.
Exactly. We can create more effective and culturally sensitive conservation solutions.
So it's like having two expert detectives working together on a case.
Yes. Imagine a conservation project focused on protecting a particular species. Scientists might use data to map habitat, understand ecological needs.
And then tech could provide all that historical context.
Right. Things like the species' past distribution, its relationships with other plants and animals, even traditional methods for protecting or managing its population.
So much richer, right?
Exactly. Integrating both knowledge systems can lead to much more holistic and effective strategies.
But I imagine that's not always easy.
It's not. It's complex.
Yeah.
There are historical injustices, power imbalances, and intellectual property rights issues.
Yeah. I mean, after centuries of colonialism and exploitation, why would indigenous communities just readily share their knowledge, right?
Exactly, and that's why approaching these collaborations with respect, humility, and a genuine desire to create these partnerships, mutually beneficial partnerships, is absolutely essential.
So how do we build that trust?
Well, first and foremost, indigenous communities need to have a real voice,
Okay.
a real say in the decision-making processes. They need to be involved from the outset.
Not just brought in at the end.
Right. Defining the research questions, designing the methodologies, and most importantly, having control over how their knowledge is used and shared.
So it's about moving away from this dynamic of just taking, extracting,
Yes.
to really making sure that everyone benefits.
100%. And ensuring that any benefits derived from conservation efforts, whether financial or otherwise, are shared equitably with those communities.
Okay, so it's about respect, reciprocity,
Yes.
and justice, really.
Exactly.
It sounds like there are a lot of ethical considerations that we need to think about,
There are.
especially when we're talking about things like intellectual property rights.
Oh, absolutely. Tech is deeply intertwined with cultural identity and spirituality, making it really vulnerable to exploitation.
Yeah. For example, what if a company discovers a valuable compound in a plant
Okay.
that's traditionally used in medicine?
Yeah.
Could that lead to communities losing control over their knowledge and any potential benefits?
That is a very real concern. It's why ethical considerations are absolutely paramount. We need to ensure that tech is respected, protected, not exploited.
Not just used.
Right. Things like community-based research protocols, benefit sharing agreements, and legal frameworks that recognize and protect tech are absolutely crucial.
So the knowledge holders,
Yes.
the indigenous communities themselves,
Yes.
they need to have control
Yes.
and they need to benefit.
They do. Respect, reciprocity, and a commitment to justice should be at the heart of any collaboration involving tech.
Well said.
Thank you.
This has been a really insightful discussion so far. It's clear that integrating indigenous knowledge in scientific research holds immense potential, especially for protecting forests.
It does.
But what are some of the specific challenges that actually arise when we're trying to implement these collaborative approaches? What are some roadblocks that people often run into?
One of the biggest challenges is bridging the gap between those different ways of knowing and understanding the world. Scientific knowledge, it often prioritizes quantifiable data, objective analysis,
Right.
while tech is more holistic and place-based, incorporating those cultural values and spiritual beliefs.
So it's like two different languages almost.
It is, and it requires open-mindedness, respect, and a willingness to really learn from each other,
Right.
recognizing the strengths of each knowledge system and finding ways to complement and enrich each other.
It's almost like a translation process.
It is.
Happening.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have any examples of maybe successful collaborations between indigenous communities and scientists where this has actually worked?
Oh, there are lots of inspiring examples around the world.
Oh, good.
One is the collaboration between the Tsilhqot'in Nation and researchers in British Columbia, Canada. They're working together to restore salmon populations and manage forests in a way that respects both scientific and traditional ecological knowledge.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they're seeing some real progress.
So what are some strategies for overcoming these challenges? How can researchers in Indigenous communities work together better?
Well, first and foremost, building strong relationships based on trust and mutual respect is fundamental.
Okay, that makes sense.
This means meaningful engagement with Indigenous communities right from the beginning.
Not as an afterthought.
Right. They need to be active participants in the research process, not just subjects.
And I imagine co-creating the research questions
Absolutely.
together would be really important as well.
It is. Developing methodologies collaboratively, making sure that the research is actually relevant to the needs and priorities of the community.
Yeah, it has to be useful to them.
It does. And equally important is ensuring that those research findings are communicated back to the community in a way that they can understand and actually use.
Not just stuck in some academic journal somewhere.
Right. It's about sharing that knowledge in a way that benefits everyone.
So it's really about a shift in how we approach research and conservation.
It is.
Not just taking knowledge, but building partnerships.
It is.
Empowering communities.
Absolutely. Recognizing and respecting Indigenous knowledge systems is not just an ethical responsibility, it's essential for effective and sustainable conservation.
Well said. This deep dive is really highlighting how important it is to approach these collaborations with humility and a commitment to justice.
I agree.
Are there other examples of ethical dilemmas that maybe we haven't touched on that we need to be aware of?
One of the ongoing challenges is the potential for cultural appropriation. It's really important to make sure that tech isn't used in ways that are disrespectful or that violate the cultural protocols of the community.
So not just taking the knowledge, but understanding the context, the protocol.
Exactly. It's about treating tech with the respect and reverence it deserves.
Yeah. And I imagine power dynamics are also at play here.
Always. We need to ensure that Indigenous communities have a real say in how research is conducted, how their knowledge is used, and building capacity within those communities so they can lead and participate in research on their own terms.
Empowering them, basically.
Exactly. Creating a more equitable and just approach to conservation that recognizes their inherent rights to their lands, their resources, and their knowledge.
It's about more than just the forests.
It is.
It's about the people, too.
It's about everything.
And their culture.
It's all connected.
Well, it's clear that integrating tech into scientific research is not without its challenges.
It's not.
But the potential benefits are huge.
They are.
And it sounds like by working together, we can create a much more sustainable and just future for forests and the communities who depend on them.
I believe that wholeheartedly. It's about recognizing the value of different ways of knowing and finding ways to bridge those differences to create a more holistic and effective approach to conservation.
Absolutely. Well, this has been a fascinating exploration of the interconnectedness of Indigenous knowledge and scientific research. It's clear that these two perspectives, they can really complement each other and lead to more effective and sustainable forest management.
Couldn't agree more.
And I love how you said it's not just about preserving the past, but it's about creating this more sustainable and just future for forests and the people who depend on them.
Exactly.
And that brings us to our final thought for today. How can we, as individuals, support collaborations that respect tech and contribute to a more sustainable future for forests worldwide?
It's something to really think about.
It is.
It is. It really is something to think about. And, it's not just about supporting those big conservation projects, though. We can all make choices in our own lives that support these communities and their role as stewards.
Yeah, I like that.
Of the forest.
Because sometimes it feels like it's such a big issue.
It is.
What can one person do?
Right. But even small actions can have a ripple effect.
Okay.
Think about our purchasing choices, for instance.
All right.
We can look for wood products that are certified by organizations like the Forest Stewardship Council, the FSC.
Okay.
They have strong standards for sustainable forest management, and that includes respect for Indigenous rights.
So being a conscious consumer, basically.
Yes. Supporting businesses that align with our values.
What are some other ways we can directly contribute?
We can support Indigenous-led conservation organizations.
Okay.
There are so many doing amazing work protecting those forests and their cultural heritage. They often have a deep, deep understanding of the local context.
And the needs of that particular community.
Exactly. And of course, education plays a vital role.
Absolutely.
Sharing what we learn, raising awareness.
Yeah. Tell everyone.
Exactly. The more we understand about tech and how important it is, the better equipped we are to advocate for policies and practices that actually respect and integrate this knowledge into conservation.
Okay, so speaking of respect, this section on intellectual property rights, this gets into some pretty complex ethical considerations
It does.
about using tech.
It's a very sensitive area.
It is. And historically, there have been way too many instances where indigenous knowledge has been exploited
Oh, I know.
for profit
Yes.
without fair compensation
Or recognition.
to the communities.
It's just wrong.
It is.
Yeah.
And that's what people refer to as biopiracy.
Exactly.
It highlights the need for some really strong ethical guidelines, clearly.
Yes, it does.
How can we ensure that tech is actually protected?
Okay, so community-based research protocols.
Okay.
Those are crucial, involving indigenous communities in every single step.
From the beginning.
From the beginning.
Huh.
Defining the research questions, controlling how the knowledge is used, disseminating
So the research is driven by them.
by them. Benefit sharing agreements are also key.
Okay.
These agreements outline how any commercial benefits are shared with the community.
So, for example, if a company develops a drug based on a plant that's used in traditional medicine,
Right.
that community would actually get a share of the profits.
Exactly. Recognizing their intellectual property rights and making sure they benefit from the use of their knowledge.
So lots of trust needed there.
Tons.
And transparency.
Transparency is key.
Are there any examples of benefit sharing agreements that have actually worked?
There are, thankfully, the Hoodia case in South Africa.
Oh.
The San people traditionally used the Hoodia plant as an appetite suppressant,
Okay.
and they were able to secure a benefit-sharing agreement with a pharmaceutical company that was developing a weight loss drug
Oh, wow.
based on the plant's properties.
So they got recognition
They did.
and compensation.
They did. It's an important precedent, setting a good example.
A good model.
Yes.
It sounds like we're making some progress,
Some.
but there's still a lot of work to do.
There's a long way to go in fully recognizing and protecting tech.
Absolutely. It feels like it requires a whole shift in how we think.
It does.
Not just viewing this as something to take,
Extract.
but really recognizing
That value.
that it needs to be protected.
Yes. It's a valuable, unique knowledge system.
Well, this deep dive is really making that clear.
Good.
How important it is to approach this with humility
Humility.
and a commitment to justice.
Absolutely.
Are there other ethical dilemmas that we haven't talked about that we need to be aware of?
I think one of the ongoing challenges is the potential for cultural appropriation.
Okay.
We need to be careful that tech isn't used in ways that are disrespectful or that violate the cultural protocols of the community.
So not just using the knowledge, but understanding the context in which it's used
Exactly.
and the protocols.
Yes, treating tech with respect and reverence.
Yeah. And I think power dynamics come into play here too.
Oh, huge.
It's not just about extracting the knowledge, but really making sure that those communities have a say
100%.
in how the research is done,
Absolutely.
how their knowledge is used.
Yes. And building capacity within those communities so they can actually lead and participate in research on their own terms.
Empowering them?
Exactly. A more equitable and just approach to conservation that recognizes their inherent rights to their lands, their resources, and their knowledge.
So again, it's about the people
It is.
as much as it's about the forests.
It is.
Well, it's clear that integrating tech into scientific research is not easy,
It's not a simple process.
but the potential benefits
Huge.
are worth it.
Absolutely. Working together, we can create a future where forests thrive, cultures are respected, and the benefits of conservation are shared equitably.
It's really inspiring to see how indigenous knowledge and scientific research can work together like that
It is.
to create these innovative and sustainable solutions. And thinking about the future of forests, what are some key areas where this kind of collaboration can really make a difference?
Well, climate change is a huge one.
Yeah.
It's a pressing issue, demanding action.
Absolutely.
And indigenous communities, they've been adapting to environmental changes for centuries.
Right.
Their knowledge is so valuable in figuring out how to deal with climate change.
So what kind of insights can tech offer? What are some specific things that come to mind?
One area is just understanding how climate change is impacting local ecosystems.
Okay.
Indigenous communities have all these observations about shifts in plant and animal behavior.
Right. Things we might not notice.
Exactly. Changes in weather patterns,
Yep.
the overall health of the forest. They see it firsthand.
And that kind of on-the-ground knowledge
It's invaluable.
would be so helpful for scientists who are trying to model
Yes.
and predict what's going to happen.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Tech can also provide guidance on how to actually manage forests
Okay.
in a way that makes them more resilient to climate change.
Okay.
So traditional practices like controlled burning, selective harvesting, agroforestry, these can all help create more diverse and adaptable ecosystems.
So basically working with the forest
Exactly.
to help it adapt.
Yep. Using both traditional practices and scientific data, we can develop much more effective strategies.
Yeah, like a combined approach.
Yes, exactly.
What other areas are you thinking about where this could really make a difference?
Forest restoration.
Okay.
We've lost so much forest cover globally,
We have.
and restoring those degraded landscapes is so important for biodiversity,
Right.
carbon sequestration,
It's all those things.
the well-being of the communities that depend on those forests.
Yeah. So how can tech help with these restoration efforts?
Well, indigenous communities often have this incredibly deep knowledge about the native plant species,
Okay.
the soil conditions, the ecological
Yeah.
processes.
They know it works.
Exactly. It's like having a living library of information about how to bring these ecosystems back to life.
That's a great way to put it.
And tech can also help with selecting tree species
Okay.
that are well suited to local conditions.
So the right tree in the right place.
Exactly, increasing the chances of successful restoration.
So it sounds like it's not just about restoring the ecology.
It's not.
It's also about restoring that cultural connection.
Yes, exactly. Recognizing that forests are not just collections of trees,
Right.
they're intertwined with the cultural identities and livelihoods of indigenous peoples.
Yeah, it's all connected.
It is.
This has been such a fascinating look at the connections between indigenous knowledge and scientific research.
It has.
It's clear they can complement each other, lead to more effective and sustainable forest management.
Absolutely. Working together, we can create a future where forests thrive, cultures are respected, and the benefits of conservation are shared equitably.
And that's what it's all about, right?
Yeah.
Moving beyond just taking, extracting,
Yes, exactly.
embracing a more collaborative
A respectful.
approach.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today.
It's been a pleasure.
This deep dive has really broadened my understanding of how important indigenous knowledge is in protecting our forests.
Whoa, I'm glad.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
Yes, thank you.
Remember, every action we take, no matter how small, can make a difference.
Absolutely.
Let's all do our part to protect those forests that sustain us all.
I agree.